All right, Ryan, we're now headed to the NFC North. I just did some push-ups, went out in the yard, did some quick sprints. Still got my athleticism there. We're going to make it happen. All right, let's go to Cleveland. Let's go to Cleveland, then we'll keep driving west to go to Chicago and talk about the Chicago Bears because here's my burning question, and I'm just going to let that lay the groundwork, and we'll get right to your burning question. But I wrote, will the 2025 Bears look like what we expected the 24 Bears to look like coming out of the gate? Because we spent a lot of time, not you, us in the media at the time, talking about how no quarterback in the history of civilization was better positioned than Caleb Williams coming in as a first-round pick with the pieces around him. Now, Matt Eberflus didn't last. The offensive coordinator got fired 6 weeks into the season. But your burning question drills down a little deeper. Did the Bears possibly have the best offseason of all 32 teams? And you're including faculty and staff when you look at that part of the website in terms of the guys they acquired to help put this team together, and then, of course, to call the plays and strategize leading up to those games.
Yeah, and I believe they did have the best offseason of all 32 teams because, like you said, it starts with getting the head coach. Over the last couple of years, Ben Johnson has probably been the most coveted coordinator to become a head coach, and the Bears were actually able to get him away from Detroit this year. And let's just, before we get on their players that they've acquired, let's look at this coaching staff. And I'm looking at my notes here. You have Ben Johnson, right, who's one of the bright offensive minds who we know what he's capable of doing on offense. Then you hire Dennis Allen to be your defensive coordinator. And then you were able to keep Richard Hightower as the special teams coordinator. But listen to these names for the assistant coaches. You got Eric Bieniemy as your running back coach. You got Antoine Randall as your receiver coach. You got Press Taylor, who is an up-and-coming young coach who will be a coordinator for someone as your pass game coordinator. And then you look on the defensive side of the ball, you got Al Harris, who's a Pro Bowl, DB in this league. And now he's your defensive pass game coordinator. And you saw what he did in developing those corners in Kansas City and then again in Dallas, So they have a really good coaching staff. And then you go on the player acquisition side, you trade for Jonah Jackson, you trade for Joe Thuney to help shore up that offensive line. And then you sign Grady Jarrett, Dayo Odeyingbo to help the defense. And then you draft Colston Loveland and Luther Burden for this offense. I think this team is well positioned to make some noise and make a push in the NFC North. And I do think they've had the best offseason.
Hey, let me ask you about Rome Odunze's last year's second first-round pick. They took Caleb first, and then they got Rome in the top 10 there. In all your years in the front office, either as a director or as a GM, what constitutes the biggest jump for a second-year wide receiver who maybe didn't meet expectations in year one? What has to happen for them to get to the level that you thought they were going to be when you drafted them?
For one, I would say that he now has a true offseason. Last season, he didn't have an offseason. He went from training for a pro day and combine to right into the NFL season and I'm sure he didn't quite know what that was going to look like. And now he's had a full offseason to perfect his craft. But then you take a young guy, you pair him with a young quarterback, and then you put him in a veteran room with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. So now he's forced to take the back seat in that room and be a third option. And now with Keenan gone and him having another year of experience and being more comfortable, you can expect him to take a bigger jump because now he's more comfortable and he'll be more used to being himself and being more of a leader in that room.
All right, I'm going to ask you what seems like a crazy question, but maybe it isn't. Who has a better wide receiver / tight end room? The Chicago Bears or the Detroit Lions?
I will say from a physical talent perspective, I would probably say Chicago.
Okay.
And again, and we'll see where Detroit is just in terms of how these guys were used and Ben Johnson being able to move guys around and get them in the best position. But I think from top to bottom, because you still have to add that Chicago still has Cole Kmet. Right, so you got Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland versus the one tight end, the Iowa kid. I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Sam Laporta.
You just really have Laporta, in Detroit, and Jameson Williams is a special talent, speed, and then we know what Amon-Ra St. Brown is. But I think you can get the same kind of production from Amon-Ra St. Brown as in DJ Moore, and then the other two is just a little bit different of a package. So don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
Yeah. You did. You said the Bears. And Tim Patrick is currently listed as a starter in Detroit. And we'll talk about Detroit in a second. They drafted Isaac Tesla in the third round, traded up to get him. You mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown. They do have Sam Laporta. And Brock Wright, the blocking tight end, is the other tight end on that roster. And this is how deep the Bears are. I had forgotten about Cole Kmet, who is obviously a big part of that offense coming into this year. All right, the follow-up to this, and this is basically my burning question. This team feels like it should have a winning record and be making some noise for the worst-case wild card push. Is that fair to say about Chicago?
I think it is, and I think they will push. I think this system is more suitable for Caleb and his ability. And then I think because we're constantly talking about this offense, myself included. But then you look at what they've done defensively. They were already a really good defense last season. And now you go and you get the interior penetrator in Grady Jarrett. And then you have another big physical edge rusher in Dayo Odeyingbo to put opposite of Montez Sweat. And so I think this defense is well positioned to make some noise and be able to stop some of these NFC North offenses. And then this offense is going to be able to put up points.
Yeah, they drafted Tyreek Stevenson a few years ago in the second round. Got Zay Frazier, another long cornerback in this year's draft. Shamar Turner, who played on the inside of Texas A&M and made it being the best of that crew, which included Nick Scorton and Shamar Stewart, guys who were drafted in the first and second round. So no excuses in Chicago. Last year we thought that was the year. Maybe it was this year, 2025. All right, next up, let's go to Green Bay, the hosts for the 2025 NFL Draft. And that was a fantastic turnout there. They drafted Matthew Golden, Robert Golden, old school safety, used to play for the Steelers. Matthew Golden, Texas wide receiver, first-round pick. First time they've taken a first-round pick since, I think, Javon Walker back in 2002, if I recall correctly, for the Packers. And my burning question was, has Green Bay finally found their wide receiver one in Matthew Golden? And my follow-up to that before you answer that, Rand, is that I saw that Jaden Reed, their former second-round pick, who's an explosive wide receiver, his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, had some questions for the Packers about where Jaden Reed fits in, because they have what feels like 50 young wide receivers, some injured, some inconsistent, in that wide receiver room. So have they finally found their wide receiver one in Matthew Golden?
I'll say it this way. He definitely has the physical skill set to be a potential number one. However, understanding what Matt LaFleur's offense is, what this system is, and how the receivers play within this system, only time will tell. And I know he'll get every opportunity to be wide receiver one. I think if you're starting off right now, I think you have to give the nod to Jaden Reed just because of his playmaking skill set and the different ways that they could get him the ball. So I think time will tell. I think if he plays to his ability and keeps going on the onward trajectory that he's been on these last couple of years, I think he can work his way into being wide receiver one.
Yeah, I wonder if it's going to be a situation like we talked about with the Cleveland Browns earlier, if they're going to be looking to move on from some of these wide receivers. Christian Watson's obviously coming back from the injury, so he's not going to be ready anytime soon. But they do have what feels like a glut of wideouts there, young wideouts and playmakers at the tight end position as well. Your burning question is one that we keep coming back to, and nothing has yet happened. And I'll ask you this. Is it going to happen? Absent of a trade, how will Green Bay manage Jaire Alexander this offseason or during the season? So if you look at the depth chart, they only drafted one defensive back, and that was late on day three, Micah Robinson. And behind Jaire on the depth chart is Carrington Valentine, a former day 3 pick out of Kentucky, who's insanely athletic. I don't know if he's ready to play down in and down out. So to your question, your burning question, Rand, what's the deal with Jaire?
I think it'll be fine initially. And then once the season gets going, depending on the type of season they're having, I think it could become a distraction late. And I think the trade will be revisited at the trade deadline. And this is just, I don't know Jaire personally. This is just based off of some of the antics and some of the things I've heard throughout the years. I think this is one where, come trade deadline in October, they'll be looking to revisit.
So why not now then? What's the holdup?
You have to have a partner. And as talented as he is do teams have the infrastructure to kind of deal with this? And also his cap number. What is that cap number? Is he looking for more guaranteed money? Is he looking for an extension? These are all things you have to work through.
Yeah, and that's a good point because, Steelers fans are saying forever, if you're going to trade George Pickens, just get a second-round pick for him before the draft and trade up and get a quarterback or whatever the conversation was going to be. Turns out no team wanted to deal with George Pickens for that price. And I believe initially, according to reports, the Cowboys offered a fourth-round pick during the draft. The Steelers said, well, wait, and they finally upped it to a third-round pick last week. And George Pickens, his issues aren't on the field. They're all sort of maturity locker room stuff. And perhaps that's, to some degree at least, what's going on with Jaire, who's a special player. There's no doubt about that. All right, Rand, let's take one more break here, and then we'll wrap out the NFC North with Minnesota and Detroit, and we'll do that right after this break. So the Minnesota Vikings were probably one of the biggest surprises last year, especially in the NFC with the way Sam Darnold played. He parlayed that into a huge deal out in Seattle, and now they're giving the keys to the car to JJ McCarthy, last year's first-round pick. Didn't play at all because of a knee injury suffered during the preseason. And your burning question is very similar to mine. And I suppose if you want anyone given this task, it's Kevin O'Connell. But you ask, how can KOC once again work his magic, this time with JJ McCarthy? And that's the question. What's the answer to that?
I believe he will. And if you go back and you look at since Kevin O'Connell took over as the head coach in 2022, he's had 6 different starters and has somehow managed to make the playoffs in 2 out of those 3 seasons. And so the proof is there that he's done it. As long as JJ is healthy, I think JJ has done if you go back to his Michigan tape, he did a really good job of playing point guard, right? And not doing anything too much outside of himself and just getting the ball into the hands of the people that can score. And he was just distributing the ball. So as long as he plays to that and listens to what O'Connell was saying and look at the proof, I think he'll be fine.
Right. Nick Mullins came in and had a spot start a few years ago, won some games. The passer, not Josh Dobbs, they traded for him, I believe, from Arizona at the time. He literally got off the plane and went right to the field, it felt like, and played well for a few games there as well. So if anyone is equipped to get the most out of these guys, it feels like KOC. And I want to see how JJ responds from being forced to take a year off. He actually looked pretty good in the preseason games he got to play in. I had some questions about him coming out of Michigan because, to your point, he was more point guard than what Michael Penix Jr. had to do or what Bryce Young had to do the year before that or what Jaden Daniels had to do last year, his final year at LSU. So we'll find out. But I think there are worse places to be if you're a young quarterback than in Minnesota. And my question was the exact same. Do you have any idea what to expect from JJ McCarthy as a starter? So let me phrase that another way. If you're KOC, what are you doing to put him in the best position to have success? Are you just leaning on the run game early on? Are you putting it in the hands of Brian Flores and the defense early on, not asking him to do a lot? Or year 2, are you willing to open up the playbook a little more?
No, this takes me back to my very first year in scouting in 2008. We had drafted a young Matt Ryan and Mike. Dang it, again, drawing a blank. I'm getting old, Ryan. I'm almost your age. But
hey, Mike Smith?
Mike Smith. Mike Smith was the head coach. The offensive coordinator. He had been a coordinator in Pittsburgh, and he's going to shoot me for forgetting his name right now. But we brought Matt Ryan along slowly. We relied on the run game, let our defense play behind it, and we kept him in advantageous positions to just make high percentage throws. And then as the season went along, we started giving him more. Matt started asking for more and wanting more. And we took a previous year three-win team, and we were 11-5 team that made the playoffs. And so I would imagine a young quarterback, first year really playing in the NFL, coming off of an injury, you're not going to put too much on him early. And so you're going to lean on that run game. You're going to lean on high percentage throws and creativity, because you still got to get Jordan Addison the ball. You still got to get Justin Jefferson the ball. You still got to get Hockenson the ball. But they're going to have to be a little bit more creative in doing that early until JJ is comfortable.
Mike Mularkey. I forgot Mike's name, too. I remember him being the OC of the Steelers. But you know what's funny? I was Googling it furiously. Arthur Smith has also been a coach/coordinator for the Steelers, the Falcons, and the Titans, which is all stops that Mularkey made. So a little – I didn't think about that fun fact there as well. The funny thing about Matt Ryan, by the way, 2008, the first quarterback taken, I think Joe Flacco was the second in that class, is that coming out of BC, the knock on Matt Ryan is that he threw too many interceptions and tried to put too much on his shoulders. Different from JJ in that JJ didn't throw a ton of interceptions, but JJ didn't do a lot. at Michigan. So there's some parallels there that there were some questions about both players coming out. And to your point, Matt hit the ground running, in part because of the offensive structure around him. So, and you know what? We talked to JJ. You're going to find this hard to believe at the Combine. I immediately fell in love. He was a great kid. Hopefully he can put it together because he has the physical tools. He has the arm. It's just a matter of getting those reps. KOC, no one better to do it, I would think. All right, let's go to Detroit, where they are now without Ben Johnson, the OC, now the head coach in Chicago, as we just talked about, and they're without the DC, Aaron Glenn, who's now the head coach in New York. And I'll ask my burning question first, which is basically your burning question. What will life look like without Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn? Because let's go back to Philadelphia when they lost their two coordinators, Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon, take head coaching jobs with the Colts and the Cardinals. And to put it politely, it was a mess with the OCs and DCs that came in. Both those guys lasted 1 year, and then they had to reset. So how do you avoid that? I think that the Lions hired from within, and is that necessarily a good or bad thing in your mind?
No, it's not. It's not a bad thing because there's continuity in the messaging, right? You're not bringing someone out from the outside in to learn the Lion way of how we're going to do things when you have the people there in the building to kind of continue to carry the message, that the guys have been hearing for a long time. But I went back and I looked at it, just looked at over the history of the game. How many times has this happened? And believe it or not, a team losing both coordinators in the same year, it's only happened 5 times in the history of the game. And the crazy stat coming off of that is all 5 teams made the playoffs the following year. And 2 won the Super Bowl.
The Eagles made the playoffs after?
Yeah, so the Eagles, if you remember, they started hot and then they went on a skid late and still managed to make the playoffs at 11-6. And so, again, all 5 teams coming off of losing both coordinators made the playoffs, and then the 94 49ers and the 04 Patriots won the Super Bowl. So things are in Detroit's favor. We'll see if they could continue to be the 6th team and have enough to take that next step and become Super Bowl champions.
Let's see if I can remember the 04. I think Charlie Weiss left for Notre Dame and Romeo Crennel maybe left for Cleveland at that point, if I recall correctly. And to your point about the Eagles making the playoffs, I had blocked that out of my mind because I think that's when they went to Tampa Bay and got absolutely roadhoused in that playoff game where they no-showed and they had to reset. And now they're the best team in football, and it's not even close. The other point is the continuity. There were questions about Nick Sirianni's. We would hear reports. I don't know how it was in the building about how secure his job was, this, that, and the other. No such concerns with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, it feels like. They feel like they're on the same page, have been from day one. And you almost to the point now where we sort of made fun of Dan Campbell for the bite kneecap stuff, but we collectively, and maybe you differ, but I just trust what they say, take it as gospel because they appear to know what they're doing.
Yeah, there's probably no one that I would trust more, especially when it comes to this draft cycle, than Brad Holmes and the work that Brad Holmes and Ray Agnew and John Dorsey and Dwayne Joseph, that those guys put in their front office to acquire players, not only via the draft, but in free agency as well. But it's like you said, it reminds me of where we were at the 49ers under Kyle and John and how we would lose coordinators and we would always promote from within. And it just kept the train rolling. And so even when we've lost offensive coordinators, although Kyle calls the plays, it was promotions from within and the train kept rolling. Now, the one time they go outside of the bubble, so to speak, and the 49ers hired Steve Wilks, and, it could be an argument as to whether it was successful or not. I think they may have gone to the Super Bowl that year or NFC Championship at least. And he was done after 1 year. And so even now, bringing back in Robert Saleh, he comes from within. He knows and understands what the day-to-day messaging is, the structure of practice, and how things are going to be. And this is what the Lions are doing. The Lions they promote from within, guys that have been there, guys who are familiar with the players. They understand how to use these players. And you're keeping the continuity and the consistency in the day-to-day messaging. Yeah,
John Morton is the new OC, and Kelvin Shepard is the new DC. When Steve Wilkes was the DC in San Francisco, it was they lost 3 games in the middle of the season. One of those games was in Minnesota, where I know the report was Shanahan was angry with the cover 0 call that led to probably a score before the end of the first half. Also, those 3 games they lost in a row, Trent Williams did not play. I know he doesn't play defense, but he, when I looked at that list of top 15 all-time earners, the only non-quarterback on there was a young man named Trent Williams. So clearly he's very important to what they did during that year. I thought you were going to make a Trent Williams comment. All right. Instead, let's take a quick break, and we got a few minutes left after the break, and I got a couple questions for you that you don't know are coming. I want to get your thoughts on recent happenings around the league, and I'll ask you those questions right after this break. All right, Rand, we got a little under 2 minutes here, but I'm going to ask you a GM question. Bengals have practice today. We got this from a reader comment, that reader being producer Stryker. So this is what he wants answered, and I think it's a fair question. Trey Hendrickson, edge rusher, Cincinnati Bengals, at practice today. Last 2 off seasons, he's wanted a new deal. He's in street clothes, so he hasn't practiced yet. He's not dressed. He spoke to the media. He said they've done right by their own perspective. My perspective is different. It's become personal, unfortunately. Every relationship is repairable. Look at Myles Garrett. So in 60 seconds, what are you doing if you're the GM and you hear that?
Me personally, I'm trying to get something done, and I'm sure they are trying to get something done. But I think him showing up today in street clothes during a voluntary session, because it's not mandatory, was him making a statement and him wanting to speak to local media, in the confines to kind of create that conflict and put that pressure, on the Cincinnati Bengals organization. And if you know the Cincinnati Bengals organization, they've operated the same way, and they do business consistently. So him and his representation know what that looks like. So good luck to him, but I would be working on trying to get something done for him.
All right. If you can give me a short answer, I would love to hear this. If you're a Bengals PR, are you furiously running around trying to stop this, or you can't do anything?
You can't stop him from being in the building. You can only try to keep him away from the media, which these guys are crafty. He knows the bowels of the stadium to get out there.
All right, Trey Hendrickson, thank you for that little fun nugget at the end of this. That is it for us here today. We'll be back on Thursday to do the rest of the NFC. In the meantime, check out With the First Pick, wherever you get your podcast, scan that QR code. See you on Thursday.